Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Progressive Bitcoiner. I'm your host, Trey Walsh, and today we have on the show the incomparable Lyn Alden. I love talking to Lyn, and she really needs no introduction, but Lyn is the owner of Lyn Alden Investment Strategy, focuses on macroeconomics. She has an engineering background, and really just brings a wealth of knowledge to the space about all things macro, knows a lot about Bitcoin. We talked about Nostr in this episode as well towards the end, but I just wanted to get Lyn's pulse check on a lot of things that have been happening recently on Trump and Bitcoin, on the election, on the economy, on her memeing of nothing stops this train. And you'll learn more about that in this episode if you don't already know what that refers to, and many other things. You know, we talk about the benefits of Bitcoin. We talk about human rights in Bitcoin. You know, all the stuff we love to cover in this show. We talked to Lyn about it as well. In addition to some many arguments and progressive arguments for Bitcoin in terms of what Bitcoin can do as savings technology for working class folks and things that we want to focus on a lot through our efforts at the Progressive Bitcoiner. So thank you, Lyn, for coming on the show. Thanks everyone for tuning in. I'll let you jump right into the episode. Don't forget about all of our Bitcoin discount links in the show notes of companies and products that I use personally, and would be happy to refer to you all to get discounts on those awesome products. And if you want to reach out to me, you can hit me up in our Telegram group, which is in the show notes, or you can reach out to me at hello@progressivebitcoiner.com. All right, enjoy the conversation. I know you will, and we will see you again next week. Hey, Lyn, how are you? Welcome back to the show.
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's on this platform, at least. I know we've kind of talked and DM'd offline. Maybe it's been about a year. I didn't check right before this. It's been quite a bit since we had you on the show, and I've mentioned this to guests that I've even had on a few months between at a time. A lot has changed since I had you on, and I think there's so many different things that we can talk about in this episode. But a lot of our content and focus recently that people will know between now and the election has been Bitcoin, the economy, party politics for better, for worse, Bitcoin's role in that, all sorts of stuff like that. So for those listening, that's something I definitely want to get into with you, Lyn, is all of these things leading up to the election. But I just wanted to first start at the top with the more recent thing in terms of the wave of adoption, cycle of adoption we're in with Bitcoin is, Donald Trump a few weeks ago now, talking at the Bitcoin conference, setting that next level of Bitcoin adoption or wave, or talking about Bitcoin as a reserve asset, all of these other things, setting that up with a presidential candidate talking about Bitcoin, and then what the Democrats do or do not do with that. And now I understand your focus, your background. And one of the reasons I like talking to you is because I think you have an ability to take a step back and analyze things. So how do you view that in terms of where we're at with Bitcoin, Donald Trump, and politics fully here on either side? And I'm not sure we can put that cat back in the bag. So how are you viewing things like that at this moment?
I think historic is probably the word I would describe. That it's a notably historic event for a former president and one of the just most famous or infamous people in the world speaking at a Bitcoin conference, right? Um, and the conference got some criticism for getting so political and almost being like a political rally in some sense. But to your point of stepping back, if we broaden that to the set of all Bitcoin conferences globally, so all the ones in North America, all the ones in South America, all the ones in Europe, all the ones in Asia, all the ones there's ones in Africa now. If we look at all Bitcoin conferences, would we ask ourselves, do we want one of them being rather large enough and political enough to attract major political candidates? And I think the answer would be yes. It'd be like if you thought of them all as one gigantic conference, you probably would want to have a little segment on that topic. And so even though at this specific conference, it obviously dominated the headlines because a number of the major headline speakers were themselves politicians, in the grand scheme of all Bitcoin conferences this year, this was only one cog in the machine, just a particularly big cog. And so I think that the conference in that sense was historic, and the fact that it's reaching that degree of scale is relevant. It's kind of part of the process that Bitcoin's going to go through. if it's going to become a large and meaningful asset and a large network and actually solve some of the problems that a number of Bitcoin proponents would like it to see it solve. It's eventually going to, butt heads with politics, either favorably or unfavorably, or most likely a mix of both. And that's kind of an early taste of what we're getting at. I mean, a few years ago there was the El Salvador announcement that was kind of entering the political realm in a big way in a small country, and now it's entering the political realm in a small way in a big country.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I agree with the word historic. I think it'll be very interesting. I feel different ways about it in the moment, weeks after, months after. I'm curious how we'll think about this. Obviously, after this next election, right? If Donald Trump becomes president, what happens? If he doesn't, what happens? All of these different things. The one thing I try to think about too is putting myself quite a bit in the real world and outside of this online space, Bitcoin podcast space, X space, whatever it is. Um, a lot of people, I mean, it did hit mainstream media in some ways that are good and bad. In for my particular focus, which is progressives, left, mainstream media, all of that kind of stuff. But in general, I think there's still a lot of people that still have an open opinion to Bitcoin. I keep reminding myself of that the people that I talk to, I try to hit home a lot of the human rights points, these type of things, so that when something like this happens, they're like, okay, I really don't like, let's say it's someone from the left. I really don't like Trump, but I understand that that doesn't reflect anything on the nature of like Bitcoin. Do you ever have any fears or reservations about someone like Donald Trump talking about Bitcoin in this way? And do you see it as a short term bump? Do you think that it presents any more partisan issues that could be problematic for Bitcoin in terms of adoption and people living in nation states, not necessarily Bitcoin at the protocol level?
The short answer would be no. I don't really have concerns around that because, if we imagine Bitcoin reaching a scale where it's relevant for politics, there's no scenario we just have a fully clean entrance and come in just fully bipartisan and just kind of kumbaya. In different countries, it's going to enter in different ways. Um, and it just so happens in the US, so far, it's been embraced more by the right side of the political spectrum on average. Um, and there's not much we can do about that. The way, the kind of when I think about US politics, kind of the single minded focus I have is reducing the probability of tail risk, draconian, anti Bitcoin types of regulation. Um, that's one of the few powers that could hamper it globally for a period of time. And more broadly, just as American people that like Bitcoin, it can make our lives worse if we have a particularly hostile political environment toward Bitcoin. And so when people ask, we can go back to, for example, the ban on owning gold by Americans. One of the most anti-American things you can think of is Americans are no longer allowed to own a benign yellow metal. Um, and that happened in the 1930s. And people always ask, couldn't that happen to Bitcoin? And my counterpoint back then is that was a super majority. There was a super majority in it was the most kind of like concentrated power we've ever really had in American politics. And so they could bypass all sorts of normal checks and balances. Um, and so one of the things I focus on is, okay, taking the environment that we have in front of us and say, how can we best work with it? So my view is right now you have there's a decent chunk of Republicans and then a smaller chunk of Democrats that understand the asset, or at least open to the asset. And if you can get a majority of Republicans and then a minority of Democrats that are open to positive on Bitcoin, you basically cut off all of that left tail risk of very draconian legislation against it. And Bitcoin is such that, I don't think it needs help to grow and get bigger. It's kind of the whole point of it. But if you can reduce a tax against it, that should be fairly constructive for it in the long run. And so I think it's the best you can do is keep educating people. During the conference, I did two things. One is I tried to amplify the conversation between Jason and Rokana, to point out that, okay, right, the headline speakers are right leaning, but it's important to realize that there are also Democrat representatives here saying favorable things about the asset. During the conference, a number of, like over a dozen Democratic congressmen and other signers wrote to the DNC saying their party has to embrace this industry better than they have. Basically, that the Warren wing is not the way to go. that you want a more constructive regulatory environment, more constructive SEC to approach this space more better than they have been. In addition, I think if I had to say, there's my single favorite event at the conference was probably Alex Gladstein talking. He did two separate main stage talks, and even before the conference, I've generally found that sharing HRF or Alex Gladstein type content is probably the single best way to orange pill um, either an institutional look or a left leaning look, which is basically like you kind of construct an argument so thorough that they can't really refute it. So it's like, hey, here's these group of women in Afghanistan in a kind of a hostile monetary environment. They used Bitcoin in a way that would have not really been possible in the banking system for them, and some of them use it to leave the country with their money at one point when they had to. Or here's people fleeing Venezuela and able to use the asset to kind of protect themselves and their family. Or here's authoritarian crackdowns in country XYZ, bank accounts frozen. Here's how the political opposition or the protesters used Bitcoin to continue operating and trying to basically spread human rights or freedom in those environments. And then you get the person to say, okay, I understand why Bitcoin is relevant to them in that circumstance. And kind of the whole point of what money is. Money is that which you hold, even if you don't necessarily need to consume it for its properties, right? So, for example, if you hold a gold coin, you might never ever expect to turn that gold coin back into a bracelet or back into some sort of electrical component in some sort of like high-end electronic. You're just holding it because you know that it has a variety of utility for other people, and you're holding it mainly for its store value purposes. Well, with Bitcoin, basically, you might feel that you're in an environment where you never need its like kind of fully self-custodial kind of cypherpunk properties, hopefully, but that other people do, and that you realize that the opportunity for that is very big, and so you hold it as a store of value, as a money, even though you don't necessarily intend to hopefully have to use it for those purposes anytime soon. And so I generally that's how I've tried to phrase it, is to say it's going to enter politics at different speeds and different directions in different jurisdictions. And then the best you can do is work with the environment that's happening, try to educate the other side as well, try to reduce the risk of tail risks, like the worst political outcomes for it, and just keep giving it more time and runway to grow and mature and get better and have more people on board.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I keep thinking about something you said. I think it was on our show like almost a year ago now, was when we were talking about the importance of having Bitcoin not be and it isn't already. Like Troy Cross and others put out a great study that even showed what a lot of us on the left knew, but that Bitcoin ownership, looking at actually who owns it versus who's loudest online, these kind of things. Like how does adoption actually look? And it's quite bipartisan, nonpartisan. What, like, people are starting to see it as an investment vehicle, as an asset, whatever the case may be, and they might be less involved with talking on Twitter about it, or whatever the case may be, which is great. That's what we want to see. But you had said something about protecting like the left flank, and not to use like necessarily just military references or that, but I continue to think about it in that way, and I continue to talk about people with even our platform or others, and I'm like, we at the Progressive Bitcoiner or myself, I'm not necessarily looking for I said this recently to someone, like a Bitcoin king or queen in the United States, right? We don't want like Kamala Harris to be the queen of Bitcoin, or XYZ politician or Trump to be the king of Bitcoin. It's about reducing risk. It's about allowing people to use Bitcoin as freely and openly as possible. And that's going to create really good benefits for the world, because for better or for worse, as we both know, the US is quite a leader on a lot of these things. So we send signals that send a domino effect around the world on this. So you had said to me a while ago just about like, it's like protecting your left flank. It's like it strengthens the overall operation, it strengthens adoption, it strengthens the place where we'd like to get to, which people have a million different answers on what that means with Bitcoin. But my thing is, we're not going to get wherever that is unless we kind of get everyone on the same page that this is a nonpartisan, a global asset. And I agree. I use Alex Gladstein is the reason that I became more involved in this space. I originally saw Bitcoin and I was like, that's kind of cool to help me with some student loan debt. That's better than this Apple stock and stuff, it seems. Let me do that. And I've admitted that. Like, I'm a progressive, I'm an Occupy guy, all this stuff, but I'm like, It's not going to cut it what I need to pay in my nonprofit career. Then I heard Gladstein on Peter's podcast, and I was like, oh, this is really cool, like above its monetary premium or whatever. And I've talked to friends about the human rights aspect as well, like from the left, so much to the point where I had a friend say, okay, I heard about like Farida and Togo. I've heard about people in Afghanistan. I've heard about all these things, but like, how does it work? And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Let's flip it back now. So now you understand, and that's just my method with people. Everyone has different. So my method is helping people understand the why, who maybe aren't technical or whatever. And then I can give them all these great tutorials that they can watch on YouTube about how it works and stuff. But yeah, the human rights element, that is typically my go-to for progressives in the left. And it's back to like the resistance money guys saying, would you rather live in a world with Bitcoin or without? And for me, I'm trying to check my own bias, but be hard pressed to find someone who can really stand at the end of the day and say, this just should not exist, period. I'm not very comfortable with that answer.
I agree, especially because they phrase it as, would you rather it exists like if you were to be born in the world and you don't know where you're going to be
Yeah.
born, and that's a
Hmm.
really important variable because you can certainly see why if you're an authoritarian, maybe you'd prefer it not to exist. But if you're
Right.
just going to be born somewhere, would you want this potential lifeline out there for especially if you need it? And I think the answer is yes. And that left flank terminology, I've been using that since 2021 to describe basically what I mentioned before, which is cutting off the tail risk of any sort of supermajority against Bitcoin. If you can get half the right and a quarter of the left, you've blocked a lot of the worst case scenarios that
Hmm.
could happen against the asset. And Peter McCormack did a really good job, I believe it was 2021, of platforming a number of people from the left side of the political spectrum to talk about Bitcoin. He kind of made it intentional to not be in this kind of echo chamber that we can kind of see sometimes forming in like podcast land. And when I saw that happen, I thought, well, I want to amplify that. I think that's a really the fact that there are voices like that out there, they're now connecting with each other and strengthening. That is a really important kind of position that has to be then helped and supported and kind of amplified because and now I think that bore fruit over these next 3 years because now there are Democratic politicians on side of it. There are even like some of these kind of bank regulations around being able to custody digital assets and stuff. You even got like Senate majority leaders and things like that on board.
Hmm.
So there's a certain scale that's been reached, and now there's all these great studies, like you mentioned, Troy Cross's study on who owns Bitcoin. That's a really useful data point. I think one of the narratives where I've been writing about Bitcoin mining for probably it's 4 years now, and I would say that I've seen a material change in how the media in aggregate talks about Bitcoin mining. It used to be almost
Hmm.
entirely negative, and now there's a number of mainstream media sources that are understanding it more. They've read these articles, they've read this research, they've listened to Gladstein, they've done more work, and you still get a lot of negative stuff, but now there's a mix of negative and positive stuff, and a number of them are starting to get it. So I do think we've kind of partially turned the corner on Bitcoin mining as a quote unquote environmental issue. And so I do think that left flank is bearing fruit, and it's protecting against some of the most negative outcomes, and it's kind of moving things forward.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm feeling less uncomfortable saying it. I'm not a superstitious person, but I have been saying more and talking with more people, regardless of their political affiliation. I'm like, I am not worried about a Bitcoin ban or whatever people want to call it in the U.S. Not just because of my beliefs on the Constitution and laws as it stands, and how can you ban numbers in your head. Not, yes, that like practically, governments can find sophisticated ways still to make it very hard or intimidate to not do that. But because of that natural coalition, there's so many different groups on like Telegram now. But we have one that we put in our show notes, like a progressive Bitcoiner Telegram group. There's all sorts of people that are in it, but kind of just build that rallying support of actually communicating with people. We have a couple of people actually from that group that are at the DNC this week, and they're kind of like letting us know what's going on, what's the tone of things like that. Around like crypto and Bitcoin. Spoiler: there's not a lot of conversation around that right now. It's not really their highest priority, which we can get into for reasons, but And there's another Telegram group that's the Bitcoin environmentalist group. And I've been a part of that for a couple of years. And just the tone shift in that group, where it was many of us, and I was a small part of this, but there's so many others like Troy, Margot, Daniel Batten constantly putting out materials, right? I'm kind of like an amateur environmentalist and care about this stuff. But we have some real heavy hitting scientists in the community combating that aggressively, right? And that's one of the reasons that it shifted is these articles ran out of steam for citing old data that they could not hold up anymore. There were folks that we connected with from Greenpeace USA and others that, and I've mentioned this on the show before, but they used to have the campaign, which was change the code that you'll remember. Now it's, well, and now it's even fading, but then it turned into clean up Bitcoin, right? Because change the code, they were clear wasn't the issue and was what wasn't, we were not willing to change about Bitcoin, that you change the code. It is not Bitcoin. Like proof of work is one of the most vital aspects of Bitcoin. And there were a lot of people that just started dropping like flies from that campaign that were reaching out to some of us, wanting to talk, wanting to chat, wanting to build bridges. And then they just left Greenpeace completely. Just because they're like, I can't take, whether it's the hate on social media from Bitcoiners, rightfully so. That's, some Bitcoiners can go a little hard, even if the data is incorrect, a little hard on personal attacks, things like that. But some of these people just left because the data is not there. So we are winning on a lot of fronts. And I've actually shifted a bit just with the limited time I have with the show, like dropping one episode a week. We were doing a lot of environmental episodes and we still will, but that issue has gotten a lot better over time. We still need to, keep our foot on the gas with these things, but you're incredibly right. That issue is almost like, yeah, good work, a year and a half in and we can move on to other things. And now it's kind of crazy with the political environment. I've started talking a little bit more about politics and about politicians because for a while, a lot of our the community, a lot of people listening to our show were writing to politicians and not getting anything. Now they're writing to politicians and saying, "Hey, Chuck Schumer is really pissed off and really wants to see some legislation on digital assets because we're going to lose to competitiveness with other areas." Right. So now we're actually communicating with campaigns. We're actually communicating with grassroots efforts that I thought was another 2, 3, 4 years out. And again, we're not doing it because I think we need that or Bitcoin needs that, but it's like, the opportunity is there. We're just going to do that. Whether that was to Trump, whether that's to others, that is yet to be seen. But things are, in my mind, things are rapidly developing. And I'm curious if you feel the same way. Like in the cycle of Bitcoin, did you anticipate that things would move as quickly as it is? Do you think it's kind of right where you maybe thought it would be in terms of institutional adoption, peer adoption, government adoption? How do you look at that?
I think there are a couple areas that are a little bit ahead or a little bit behind where I would have guessed. So, for example, institutional adoptions probably roughly where I'd expected to be, given that they finally allowed ETFs, and it took literally the SEC had to basically lose a lawsuit
Right.
to have that manifest. Thankfully, there's kind of like for the most part, independent, kind of rule of law, separate, independent courts. Um, and so with the launch of the ETFs, there's more incentive for the financial system and institutions to understand it better. Back in like 2021, I would read these like research reports from investment banks, and they'd mention Bitcoin can't scale, and then they wouldn't even mention Lightning in their 50-page report, right? And it's like
Yeah.
the caliber of content was so weak, and the research was so weak. That's really improved in the past several years. Sometimes I talk to institutions. They do, reach out and get kind of like people to put input or educate or just kind of have Q&As with say executive teams. Um, there are some of these major banks that have like heads of digital assets. They're actually plugged in to the space better than they rather than just kind of someone approaching it from the outside and I'm here to with Bitcoin. I'm going to fix it now. Like that
My
view's
tinfoil
gone.
hat, or
Exactly.
yeah, yeah,
Now it's
yeah.
actually like people that have better research in place. So I think that's about roughly on track. I think there's a fewer number of small countries embracing it than I would have guessed. Um, so like you'd think there'd be more El Salvadors out there running
Yeah.
this kind of playbook. I mean the UAE has been there. The Kingdom of Bhutan is mining. Um,
Mining a lot. Yeah.
Singapore has been kind of a foothold. Parts of Switzerland's a foothold. But you think you'd see other countries kind of tapping into this like cheat code, basically.
hmm
So I think and same thing for companies. Companies probably took a little bit longer than I thought. The accounting issues are hard. Kind of the only companies that embrace it are ones where they're kind of run like a small business. Like there's a founder still running it that is able to just kind of like, they're thinking 5 or 10 years in advance. They're kind of able to just make things happen versus a career CEO who's, owns 1% of the stock and is thinking, 1 year at a time, for example, and is thinking more about
Hmm.
career risk. Um, so some of these accounting changes I think will help with that a little bit. So some areas like that are a little bit behind. An area that's ahead is I did not think we'd have a former president speaking at a Bitcoin conference in 2024, right? So and
Yeah.
like the number, and not just that. So let's put one person aside. The number of senators and congressmen, they were all at the same conference. Now it is an
Hmm.
election year, so I guess it makes sense that some of that was pulled forward. But that I would say that's relatively ahead of where we'd expect it to be. I also think that the Bitcoin mining um, education in media and among institutions has improved a little bit faster than I would have guessed when I started kind of writing about it and trying to, because I saw just a very hostile journalistic environment to it. And I was like, let me just write some long form stuff to at least start putting out a foothold to try to like Nick Carter had already been doing really good kind of
Hmm.
work on
Yep.
that. And it's like let me help add to that, and we've gotten more over time, and a bunch of people have been kind of pushing back on that, and so that's actually turned the corner faster than I would have guessed. I think that if I were to guess the biggest battleground ahead, it's privacy, the right to financial privacy in general, which can sometimes tie into self custody.
Hmm.
I think that's an aspect that's going to take a lot longer to kind of change people's minds on or make people care about.
Yeah, I agree. That's one thing that I had Yael and Pierre on recently to talk about the US strategic reserve. So we did a whole episode just devoted to that, and all the opinions around that. But I continue to, and people sometimes in the Bitcoin community, we as progressive Bitcoin, a lot of progressive friends I have are really concerned about individual and community and privacy. Some people in the community only view progressives as our worst politicians, I'd say, as like Elizabeth Warren. Well, I probably talk about Elizabeth Warren every other episode, and we're not a fan of her approach to this topic, right? But that's one thing that I am deeply concerned about and hoping to connect enough by talking more about human rights, by talking more about these things, is those people that not even necessarily like, yes, the legislators, but a lot of the kind of three-letter agencies, a lot of these emergency orders that saw the rise of things like the Patriot Act that then got overwhelming support because of some war or catastrophe that happened, and then taking advantage of that, right? That is what I fear as a person from the left, as a progressive. I mean, I was in fourth or fifth grade around the time of 9/11 and Patriot Act, but that informed the world that I continued to grow up in at that time. And I'm still deeply concerned that that could happen in ways. I mean, we've seen it quite a bit throughout Europe on a lot of things, but I think we are in the age of crackdowns on privacy. So people ask me all the time, like, do you think Bitcoin will be banned? Well, what happens this? And I'm like, well, if we're at a point where Bitcoin is effectively banned, then not only am I worried about Bitcoin, that's one, I'm worried about the world we live in beyond that. Because if you're able to ban Bitcoin, that means other rights have been taken away that I would say are unconstitutional, and are just not good for human rights the world over, that the UN is out against some of these. So I continue to be weary about that. You mentioned kind of research and the role that you've played in this, putting out some, whether it's long form content, articles. I mean, even putting out the video you did a few months ago, I think was incredible. Like 20, 25 minutes, just formulating some thoughts from Broken Money, your book. What are ways that folks in the community, anyone that really cares about these things, even outside of politicians, right, continuing that advocacy, can effectively make change to let people know, hey, crackdowns on privacy are really bad, and this is why it's really important, right? Kind of these things that would effectively be backdoor bans or something that could ban a privacy mixer or coin join for Bitcoin. What are some ways that you see, whether it's your role or more people in the community becoming active in that, outside of politics, outside of all of these partisan debates, just why it's good that privacy exists and we should continue fighting for it?
I think there are a handful of different angles. One is when people often think of privacy, they often think of privacy from the government. The other thing you should immediately remind people of is privacy from corporations.
Yeah.
Like how many people would be like,
Which is our
yes,
audience's bread and butter. Like,
exactly.
progressive left,
That
we're
that's
really
the
good about the
yeah.
corporate side, maybe not as good about the government
Exactly.
side.
So if you're selling the idea of privacy to the right, you say, "Hey, do you want the government to spy on you?" They say no. You're like, "Good. You support privacy."
Yeah.
If you're selling it to the left, you say, "Hey, do you like the idea of giant corporations spying on you?" No. Great. Then you should like privacy.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and to the extent that someone is doing something illegal in in a bad way, that's where policing resources should be applied, not to the state of privacy itself. Um, and in the U.S. we have the Fourth Amendment, which in theory should provide pretty good protections of privacy, and probably has not been applied enough with, say, well-capitalized court cases to kind of go push back on some of these kind of anti-privacy things. Privacy, and you can also, if you're talking to the left side, talk about again that kind of HRF Gladstein type thing where you say, okay, well, remember half the world is some shade of authoritarian, depending on how you measure it. Let's say you go to
Hmm.
Freedom House or some other way of quantifying, rule of law, civil rights, democracy, participation in government, ability to express yourself. There's something like half the population living under in environments where that's not pretty open. And like communications, digital communications, and private money transfer is really good, useful tool for people in those environments to organize and to try to get around that level of oppression. So multiple case studies are useful there. So, for example, when Nigerians were protesting police violence and their bank account was shut down, they could turn to accepting Bitcoin. When Alexei Navalny in Russia, when their accounts are being shut down by Putin, for example, they turn to Bitcoin as donations and they kind of keep that somewhat flowing. Um, and there are even organizations today that raise money for Russians that are opposing Putin, but then ironically they have trouble moving money because sanctions and things like that. Even though they're trying to do things that would actually be supportive of the people that are put those sanctioned in, right? And so that's where some of these private forms of money are very helpful. And so I would kind of just the way that I would phrase it is mostly it's somewhat of a technological problem that then changed our perception on what is the default. So prior to telecommunications, the default was privacy. Even the most authoritarian king wouldn't even think that he'd be able to monitor everyone's transactions. It wouldn't even occur to him because it's so impossible. People are just literally exchanging like silver coins with each other for purchases. It's inherently private. And then cash, also inherently private. As we've entered this era where everybody keeps their money in the bank, banks are all like surveilled, and everybody's kind of sending money around. The government basically increased, and both the government and corporations increased their expectations of what they should be able to surveil. And then our norm became, well, if someone wants privacy, they must be weird or up to no good, right? And so
Hmm.
the default changed, and now the technology continued to progress such that we now have, thanks to cryptography, fairly sophisticated ways to do private online transactions as well, which then governments immediately crack down on. Like in the Bitcoin space, if there's things you go to jail for, not just like get fined by the SEC, but actually go to jail for. One is losing billions of dollars, and two is in any way facilitating private money movement. Those are the people that end up in jail.
Hmm.
And that's I think that's rather authoritarian and not great. And so I think that as we get into a new reality, where cryptography, the Pandora's box is opened. There are ways to send cryptographic information. There's ways to send cryptographic value transfer, and that it takes rather authoritarian techniques to crack down on that. And one of the closest comparisons we have is the 1990s crypto wars, which was not about cryptocurrency, but it was basically about encrypting communications, information. So basically, Phil Zimmerman created open source encryption methods, and when the U.S. saw that they like had gone overseas, that this information had spread, they went after him criminally and said, "You've exported like arms, like you violated arms exports rules." And so what he did was he published it in a book, the code in a book, and said, "Well, it's just expression. It's just a bunch of words and numbers. It's protected by the First Amendment." And that's a situation where David beat Goliath. Like the U.S. had to kind of adjust how it approached encryption because technology was just too bottom up, too available, and it took the optics and the expense of pushing back on it was not good. And I think we have to kind of reach a similar state with money, which is kind of reset back toward what is the default? Is if we're going to prevent 1% of criminals from doing stuff, does that mean everybody's accounts have to be surveilled by both the government and corporations? Which inevitably get leaked on the dark web. Another thing you can do is point out how many crazy hacks and leaks and exploits happen and just spill tons of people's personal information onto the dark web, which then can exploit their identity or go after them for other ways. And so there's all sorts of reasons why privacy is normal, and to kind of bring that back toward normalcy and help people see that look, every single time someone transfers $1,000 and it happened to be implicated in some criminal thing or something, remind them that one, cash is still the biggest area where they do that by far. And two, the amount of rights you have to give up to make that impossible are so draconian that it's not worth it. And then instead, that's where other types of policing and other types of law enforcement or intelligence are useful to try to combat some of the worst actors out there without cracking down on everyone's privacy.
Yeah, it's almost this. Hopefully, it's something that'll almost be as silly as well. Commuting to work Monday through Friday, post COVID now, where more people are doing that, is not worth the risk of one of the largest reasons for death or fatality in the U.S. is automobile accidents. Right, it's up there. So everyone should work from home all the time. That should, right. A lot of people like the freedom to work from home, but saying the risk is not worth it, right? People would be like, well, I mean, maybe it is. Yeah, they don't even view it that way. They don't even view it as, okay, I'm getting in my car today. Okay, I'm going to take the risk. I'm going to go out there, right? Like I feel that when I get in an airplane, even though I know the statistics are not on our side, where it's relatively safe. People think about that as well with cars. They're like, I'm gonna be relatively safe. I'd like it to get to a point where we're thinking, no, not in terms of what are the bad things that could happen, but imagine all the good things and all the neutral things, just the daily life that is happening on a daily basis through these rails. And part of me too, because I talk with friends about this, whoever about this, we've gotten so comfortable and used to data being out there, people saying the assumption that, well, I'm sure they already have everything on me anyway, in terms of, well, social security numbers leaked again recently. People already think it's all out there. I think there's just a lot of people that live their life these days, like in the US, that just assume that, well, if they want something, they can get it anyway. And well, my credit card company, they'll flag a suspicious transaction and then that'll catch it. So it's almost like people have accepted, my it's already all out there. Everything about my life is out there. And things that are really important will be flagged, right? I think how do you think we can combat that? I think it's really hard to just talk to normal people about this.
I think that, I mean, that's a really privileged position to have.
Yeah,
Basically
very true.
saying that, we live in one of the freer societies out there. Basically, one of the low hanging fruit is, can you go to your town square and say your government's bad and make fun of them and not get like trouble,
And not go to
right?
prison, not get beaten up. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Can you do that peacefully? And in the United States, the answer is usually yes, you can. There's other countries where you can, and then there's a lot of countries where you can't, right? So people will say, oh, that country is actually free. It's like, well, okay, show me a peaceful protest where they make fun of their leader and see how that goes. And I would also use the argument of the like resistance money, right? To say, if you were born in the world and you don't know ahead of time where you're going to be born, would you want digital privacy to be an option available to you, right?
Mhm.
And so, for example, if you're born gay in Saudi Arabia, you probably want some recourse to be able to live your life or be able to organize or in some way try to flourish in an environment that's very oppressive, especially if the government could see every single thing you're doing. What if you're born in China and you want democracy, right? It'd be helpful to have some of these like freedom fighter type of defensive tools. They're not aggressive tools; they're defensive tools for organization, for spreading information, for spreading value to people that you support. Even the world's largest democracy, India. there's been crackdowns on like political opponents like bank accounts and their ability to talk on social media and stuff. Right now, one of the biggest takedown requests for Twitter X is from India, and
Mhm.
they're actually allowed a lot of times. They do take down a bunch of stuff on the request of the government. Same thing for places like Turkey. And so the ability to share information privately or share money privately, I would say that around the world, there's far more good people that would benefit from that capability than bad people. Most bad people would benefit from it. But what percentage of the world population is criminals versus what percentage of the population is minorities in oppressive environments or democracy supporters in authoritarian environments or people that just they might be totally normal people and they just don't want a big corporation to surveil every transaction they do, monitor their location on a real-time basis, build really comprehensive databases and algorithms for how to manipulate that person to buy more things. That's really creepy. That's really dystopian. And so I would kind of just keep reframing it toward privacy is normal. There's more good people that would benefit from privacy than bad people, and there are ways to handle bad people that use privacy. Bad people use email. Bad people use cash. Bad people use uh, you know they fly planes, like they
Mhm.
drive cars. There's
Phones,
Yeah, they
whatever.
use. We don't have to ban everything because some bad people use it. Instead, we use policing at their, to try to prevent and or protect against criminal behavior in other ways.
Hi, everyone. Hope you're enjoying the episode. Today's episode is brought to you by Bitbox. Now, Bitbox is a hardware wallet that's open source, incredibly secure and easy to use, and it's what I'm using to safely secure my Bitcoin in cold storage. Now, I know self custodying Bitcoin can really be intimidating, but Bitbox is designed for ease of use without compromising on security. It's USB C compatible and allows you to easily back up and restore your private keys with a micro SD card, which is really cool. Now, you can purchase the Bitbox using the promo code TPB at the link found in the show notes for 5% off your purchase. And I really want to thank Bitbox for their support of the podcast. All right, I'll let you get back to the episode now. Look, one of the many things I've learned from you quite a bit just coming into this space is just kind of fundamentals of macroeconomics, or just kind of calling out things that we see quite a bit, especially in an election season, an election cycle. And one of the things I want to talk to in terms of just the benefits of Bitcoin, because this phase I find myself in, which we can touch on a little bit, but is totally another conversation as well, is there is the group that some people have heard about, the Crypto for Harris group. There's certain people that I've been able to connect to through that group and others to try to be a how do we put it, like Bitcoin non-toxic maxi, like presenting the case for Bitcoin to progressives when progressives and different campaigns are going to hear a broader crypto platform. Policy and legislation is going to be broadly at this point around crypto and digital assets. And I'm not necessarily trying to go into rooms and saying the US government needs to ban all crypto projects, only Bitcoin, right? That's probably not going to be very well received as well. So trying to do my part in that. But one of the things that I think I've found is I do have a lot of friends on the left and progressive that are getting a bit more into and open to crypto. And it's kind of almost this full circle of when I first really got into Bitcoin and started to really understand it early 2021. That was a spike of quite a bit of other crypto projects. Obviously, the blow up of FTX not long after that. All of these things, and I think some people on the left, particularly, might find a community or a group they're more fond of in another crypto project. They might say, well, Bitcoin as this sound money argument, this gold, it's not really able to do the things that we want to do with other things, even though it's not even getting into lightning and beyond that we've come to at this point. So one of the things I wanted to just talk with you and touch on at this moment is the Kamala Harris, their campaign. They actually just today, and I've just got a chance to skim over it, but kind of the Democrat priority going into the Democratic National Convention this week, and their economic priorities, their campaign talking points. And for better or for worse, these are the things that they've probably polled around and suggested that voters like to see them say something on. And each one has like a paragraph. It's not in depth. It's not representative of legislation that will get passed, all of these things. But Democrats are very keen on workers, on low income workers, on affordability, on all of these things that you've written a lot about the inflation after COVID, the reasons for inflation, different monetary tools, different global trade, all of these things that led to kind of inflation that we're seeing today. Workers' rights, all of these things around workers. So I wanted to touch with you on Bitcoin, the properties of Bitcoin, and what would potentially make it a very good thing for workers or low income workers in the US that Democrats really are trying to appeal to say life is really hard. It's really hard to afford things. Inflation is ravaging all of these things. Why would that group of people be interested in Bitcoin? Because a lot of folks on the left see Bitcoin today and they still think, some of them might think Donald Trump, some of them might think super rich and privileged to be able to own this amongst many other assets, or they just might not be interested at all in comparing it to their daily life. So, what do you see as the role, short term, probably long term, for Bitcoin as it relates to like workers and low income individuals, and not just wealthy elite that Democrats are not going to be interested in thinking through, or Democratic voters are going to be like, yeah, we're not into that.
Yeah, I think that's actually one of probably the more challenging aspects to articulate, because I would say most of the benefits are potentially longer term,
Yeah.
and painting a vision that they might not be on board with right away. I mean, in the near term, it's a useful asset that they can hold. People can dollar cost average into it in very small amounts, often more accessibly than they could stocks, or similarly accessibly. Um, it's generally easier to market Bitcoin on the edges, which is to say, if someone is, in an authoritarian state, or in Argentina with runaway inflation, it's easy to explain either to them or to others why Bitcoin's useful in that environment for the everyday
Hmm.
person. If you're in Argentina, Bitcoin is, you don't really have access easy access to U.S. stocks. You don't have if you're working class, you don't really have access to offshore bank accounts, right? Like the wealthy in Argentina do. Instead, things like Bitcoin and stable coins serve as a lifeline for people to save money in that kind of hostile monetary environment. And people that are, again, trying to move money out of failed states, or trying to, hold money in a place where their bank accounts get shut down if they say the wrong thing, right? So that's a fairly low hanging fruit. Then the other end of the spectrum, if you're explaining to someone on Wall Street why Bitcoin's good, you can just show them the performance, show them the characteristics, explain why it's worth owning, and how it's a useful investment product. The middle, or the lower middle, or the upper middle, that's where it gets a little bit murkier, because it's hard to say, other than just if you buy it and the price goes up, that this is going to meaningfully impact your life or your world in the next 3 years, 5 years, right? So that's a more nuanced case to make. That's where you have to get into like more wonky macroeconomics. For
Hmm.
example, when we talk about this recent period of inflation, well, first of all, I point out that it was bipartisan, in the sense that I started to write about this likelihood of inflation in 2020 under the Trump administration. And I continued writing about it in 2021 under the early Biden administration, because we had this big surge of money supply growth, large monetized fiscal deficits, which with a lag tend to cause price increases. If we could just increase the money supply by 40% in a short period of time and not cause price increases, then that would be like the philosopher's stone of money, right?
Hmm.
That would just be how you create wealth. You just create more money and prices don't go up, so everybody's richer. But of course, when you create more money, there's then more demand for roughly the same amount of stuff, the same amount of goods and services and labor, infrastructure, industrial base. That only changes on a slower basis, and so there's more money chasing it. And the problem is that it almost seems like every time there's an emergency environment, a lot of that money is poured into the top, right? So in 2008, for example, banks got quite a lot of bailout compared to homeowners, right? So we expanded, the base money. We did all these bailouts, but they were concentrated toward the top. People got millions of dollars in bonuses and got their bank equity saved, and then they had 1 year of like lower bonuses, and they went back to getting their giant bonuses. Whereas a lot of people lost their homes because they didn't get a similar type of support. And then in this recent period with COVID, for example, there was that more broad-based support, but then they still found ways to kind of inject it more into the top. And so one of the programs that I point to is the PPP program,
Hmm.
right? On its surface, it sounds good. We're bailing out smaller businesses, that are kind of either forcibly shut down due to lockdowns or because the pandemic's happening and they're not getting customers. We want to not have a wave of bankruptcies, so we'll provide these loans to turn into grants in exchange for not letting employees go. But the issue there was that they weren't really focused on certain industries. Like they weren't just restaurants and hospitality. They were a very broad-based set of businesses. They didn't really do any sort of checks because even the logistics of checking would be hard. They didn't really do checks for, are you actually going to fire people if you don't get this money or not really? And so the end result was law firms, technology firms, investment firms got like $1 million PPP loans that turn into grants when they were just working from home fine. They were continuing to operate. They were continuing to be profitable. They didn't really intend to fire anybody. And so that just goes to the bottom line of the multi-million-dollar owner or owners, shareholders. Um, and there's been studies on this that published it, and they said, the cost per saved job was multiple six figures. It saved very few jobs relative to the amount of money printed and spent, and the vast majority of the financial value went to people on the top on the upper end of the income spectrum. So that was basically, middle class people get a multi-thousand-dollar stimulus check and a multi-thousand-dollar child care tax credit, but a wealthy business owner gets 100,000 or 250,000 or a half a million or even $1 million support. Basically, that's a gigantic stimulus check. And then there were corporate bailouts and there were all sorts of other things. And so one of the arguments I make for Bitcoin is that it's, holding money that people can't print reduces the opaqueness with which your savings can get diluted. Um, but that applies to other assets as well. One of the challenging things of why this is hard to apply in the near term is that it can't necessarily protect against wage dilution, right? So the problem with rapid expansions of the money supply, monetary debasement, is that it goes against fixed contracts. Basically, the government is now unilaterally affecting everyone's contracts, including wages, but also including supplier agreements between businesses, right? So if you've agreed to work for a wage, inflation puts the burden on you to keep upgrading your contract, right? So the employer likes the status quo. If they agree to pay you $20 an hour and the money supply is growing, they get to kind of play hardball and say, well, why do you want to raise? Why are you better this year than last year? And if money supply is growing by 10% a year, it's hard. The burden's on you to try to not get your income diluted compared to the overall share of money and income that is out there. But that's not something that Bitcoin fixes in, say, a 3 to 5 year period. That's a long-term vision that Bitcoin can help with. But in the near term, the case is more obvious for the extreme tails, and then for the middle, it's mainly a savings asset, a optionality asset, something you can hold yourself, unlike stocks or unlike bonds. You can hold it as a bare asset. You can use it as payments, but it is admittedly harder to make the immediate case for a lot of those certain groups.
Yeah, I figured that'd be the answer because it is. It's one of the hardest things for me to talk about. I think for anyone thinking super thoughtfully about this, I know there's a lot of like, quotes and things we like to say, and Bitcoin fixes everything, Bitcoin fixes it, but there's so much that, especially me being on the progressive side, I'm very adamant about, well, I believe the government should exist. I believe taxes should exist. A lot of these things, that's kind of a starting point for some Bitcoiners I'll debate. But even more so, the reason that over a long enough time horizon, Bitcoin is a parallel system, because the current system, if that changes in a really harsh way, that's going to hurt millions and billions of people around the world in pretty dramatic ways, more so than they already are, right? And I'm not saying there's Bitcoiners or people in the space outright saying that should end tomorrow and being very vocal about that, but thinking really thoughtfully about how do we unwind or alter something while also onboarding, let alone the technical limitations that we're still figuring out with Bitcoin, and drastically improving. That's a really, really tricky thing for me. And this is a nice segue to what I wanted to talk with you about in terms of a meme that you love putting around. It's not, I mean, it's a statement. You meme it all the time, like nothing stops this train. Like constantly putting that out, probably for a while, but more and more recently. First of all, for folks that don't know, why do you say that? What is that in reference to? And what thoughts do you have, even if it's not the sexiest answer, about what we do going forward, right? Not everyone's going to become a super wealthy Bitcoiner tomorrow, or kind of just radically change the way they're living, or the government supports they're receiving, or Social Security, or all these other things that we have, all of these liabilities that we don't have answers for. We have all of this government debt that we don't have answers for. That, me personally, you might agree with this, the government is very good at kicking the can down the road. And I personally think they'll continue to do that as long as they can. Maybe our entire lives without catastrophe, maybe not, maybe 10 years. I'm not sure. I'm not usually a doomsdayer with this stuff because they're very frustratingly sophisticated with this. So, what is it that, nothing stops this train? And then what are you looking at in terms of ways for us to cope with that, and countries and nations to cope with? We'll focus on the US specifically, with $35 trillion in debt, an affordability crisis, inflation slowing down, but it always feels a little too soon to say that sometimes. How are you viewing these things these days?
Right. So as a bit of background, in 2019 and 2020, I started focusing on the topic of fiscal dominance, which is to say that the U.S. fiscal deficits are getting structurally larger as a share of the economy, and there's very minimal way that they're ever going to shrink. The public debt to GDP is very high, which constrains the effectiveness of monetary policy, and you start to get an interest expense spiral. So for 40 years, we've had rising debt to GDP, and the whole way along, people have been saying the debt's going to be a problem one day, the debt's going to be a problem one day. Decades go by, and it's still not like a major acute issue. And part of that is because we've had 40 years of structurally falling interest rates. So if you double your debt, but you cut your interest rate in half, your interest expense is still very manageable. And that's basically the process we've been doing for 40 years. Well, the problem is we bounced off zero interest rates, and now we're going sideways to up, while our deficits are bigger than ever because our demographics are worse than ever, and our interest expense is actually starting to matter. So when you no longer have that structurally falling interest rate environment, the fact that you have structurally rising debt to GDP and larger deficits actually starts to matter. Um, and so that's and like there's other ways to quantify it. So there's different sources of money creation. There's monetized fiscal deficits, and there's bank lending, for example. And in most of, call it the past 50, 60 years, bank lending, there's more net bank lending than fiscal deficits in a given year, outside of kind of brief recession environments. But increasingly, we're entering an environment where deficits are bigger than total bank lending that year.
Hmm.
Basically,
And I just threw up the debt clock, as Lynn can see, for folks
yeah.
who might be watching, just throwing up the debt clock, which is always very overwhelming on the surface, and these colors. Like, just few figures here, like interest on debt, 922 billion. There's different, all sorts of pie charts and things like that. So this area here, just in terms of the budget, in general, obviously the U.S. national debt is at 35 trillion right now. So those are some of the numbers that Lynn was referring to for folks.
Yeah, so we're in this environment of now structurally high fiscal deficits. Um, and so about a year ago in 2023, I started to use the meme "Nothing stops this train," which is a reference to Walter White in Breaking Bad. I don't want to give too many spoilers, but basically toward the end of the show, um, some of his partners were like, "Maybe we should slow down," because he was like selling drugs in the show, and he became like this.
Shocker! Spoiler alert.
Yeah, yeah. People, it's an old enough show. So he's like a kingpin now, and some of his partners are saying we should slow down, we should do this, and he's like, no, nothing stops this train. We will keep it flowing. Nothing stops this train. And so it's a really kind of like famous scene, and I apply that to basically the fiscal deficit. That there's virtually nothing that is going to slow down, like meaningfully slow down the structural large fiscal deficits that the United States has for the foreseeable future. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, a lot of it's just demographics. It's accumulated decisions. Social Security used to have like 3.5 workers paying for every retiree. Now it's down to like 2.5 workers paying for every retiree. The retirement age used to be somewhere around life expectancy. Now life expectancy is like way higher than retirement age. It's just how things have worked out mathematically. Then there were the Iraq wars and the whole kind of Middle East conflict. You know, I think Brown University estimates that all things considered, it was something like $8 trillion of costs especially when we include things like the lifetime of veterans benefits because of all that, and the kind of the homeland security apparatus and interest expense on the liabilities that we did.
Yeah.
So
And do
we
you know if that was prior to the kind of, great financial crisis in 2008, that 10 trillion? Because then also there's kind of the inflationary
there's
environment
they're
after
still
that.
they're still updating that. So that's actually
Yeah. Okay.
that's more, that's like, say, maybe an estimate from 2-3 years ago.
Gotcha.
Um,
But still
yeah, and
a ton of money,
it
obviously.
continues
Yeah.
to accumulate because interest is still building on it, and kind of the full effects are still working their way through the system. So basically, the structure of the entitlements, the sheer scale of, kind of, I would argue, unproductive military spending, um,
Hmm.
has really kind of accumulated into this really high public debt to GDP ratio. Um, and now we have a very polarized political environment. So this isn't the 90s anymore. This isn't the 50s anymore, 60s.
Hmm.
This is a very polarized environment. So it's very hard to meaningfully raise taxes, or to meaningfully cut spending. Even in the Republican Party, if you look at their actual platform this year, protecting Social Security and not going after it is now in their party. So even compared to like a decade ago, this is not the Paul Ryan Republican Party anymore. This is a more populist, Trumpian Republican Party.
Yeah.
Let
Trump was a
alone,
complete populist, previous
exactly,
Democrat populist that
yeah,
saw an entry into the GOP. And that's not me saying that as someone who isn't into Trump, but I think he very much radically altered that party for
yeah.
being the more disciplined outside of war spending of the Bush era, but disciplined on those fronts. Yeah, it's
Yeah, there's
like
no
fair game
there's
for both
yeah,
parties at this point. Yeah.
exactly. There's not really any fiscal conservatism in the Republican side anymore. The Democratic side certainly doesn't want to go after Social Security. The only thing they want to go after is drug prices, which is an area to go after. But there's no meaningful. If anything, they want to expand healthcare to more people from the government ledger. So there's no appetite to go after the meaningful areas of expense. Even the military side, there's little meaningful, especially with what's happening now in Ukraine, what's happening in the Middle East, kind of a Cold War environment with China. There's very little appetite to meaningfully go after the military budget. So there's really no clear path toward deficit reduction. Um, Studies have shown if you get up to something like 130% debt to GDP, it's very hard, like it's virtually impossible to get out of that without some degree of currency devaluation. Basically, there's a default's going to happen, although it need not happen nominally. It can just happen through purchasing power, which is to say, like if you own bonds going into the pandemic, you got every dollar owed back to you, but your ability to buy almost anything else went down. You can buy less house, less gold, less stocks, less Bitcoin, less paper towels than you could if you had held anything other than bonds, right? And that, I think, is just kind of the early start of a long term, not great purchasing power for bondholders. Um, and the further complicating thing is that even if somehow lawmakers came together and did some grand bargain and brought the deficit from 6% of GDP down to 2% of GDP, um, in the US, our tax receipts are so tied to asset prices, unlike actually a lot of other countries like Europe or Japan, our our tax receipts are very tied to asset prices, just because partly it's the wealth concentration and partially it's because of how our executive compensation works. And so if we do austerity and we likely end up slowing down asset prices because of it, we risk hurting our tax receipts and therefore widening the deficit anyway. It's a very complex like knot to untangle. And so that's why I say, in all practical reality, there's really no stopping this fiscal train. We're going to have very large deficits as far as the eye can see. Sometimes they're probably going to be monetized by the central bank in order to keep them flowing, in order to keep the treasury market liquid. And that's kind of a background inflationary aspect that goes against any other deflationary offsets that there are, like productivity increases, you know, um, all these other things that are happening. There's this kind of background component there. And even in a fairly benign environment like Japan, for example, unlike the United States, they have structural current account surplus. They've got the most debt, public debt in the world, and their currency devalued pretty significantly over the past couple of years. It's actually one of the contributing factors to why their prime minister is resigning. Um, and if you were in Japan, going back to how this could benefit a working class person, any Japanese person holding Bitcoin protected their global purchasing power, better than almost anything else you could have owned as a Japanese person. So Japanese people right now, it's harder for them to travel abroad because of the exchange rate. It's harder for them to buy imports because of the exchange rate. But if they were holding Bitcoin, they've done quite well. And that's, Japan is not some sort of, Mad Max catastrophe. It's a developed country that's going through demographic issues and currency issues. It's deep into fiscal dominance, even more than the United States. But the U.S., when we get to Japan's stage, we're going to be doing it with a structural trade deficit, not in a current account deficit, not the current account surplus that they have. So we could actually run, and we have more political polarization than Japan. So, I think that the developed world in general, there's more polarization in Europe. There's more polarization in the U.S. We're getting more and more debt on most of our public ledgers, and that this is a long-term spiral. And to your point, they can go on for a very long time. This is not something that blows up 2 years from now. This is a long-term structural background thing. I go to Egypt every year, and over the past, if you look at their inflation data going back to 1960 or something like that, like the 1960s, their average has been around 10 or 12% inflation. They've never hyperinflated. They've managed, compared to many other frontier markets, they've managed to hold it together in that sense. But the average inflation was something like 10%. The average money supply growth was 15 to 20% a year. And lately, it's been on the higher end of that. They've had kind of inflationary crises. So that people have been dealing with 40% inflation. Um, and life goes on, and people still go on vacations. They still go to take their kid to childcare. They still run their small business. They still go to the hospital and work as a doctor. Life goes on, but it's this background annoyance that is hurting them. And those that are positioned for it protect themselves, because the wealthy already have many options to protect themselves. The wealthy own property that is leveraged with the currency that's shorting away, right? So they borrow the currency, they buy property, and the equivalent of a mortgage gets inflated away, and they own the property. Or they go and buy foreign assets. They buy S&P 500, they buy gold, they buy things, they buy Bitcoin. They have all sorts of ways to protect themselves. The further you go down the spectrum, the more people don't have ways to protect themselves. They can't just buy the S&P 500. They can't just buy, there's all sorts of frictions. But if someone in Egypt owns Bitcoin, they've kind of protected themselves against a lot of that issue. And so whether it's an extreme environment, a middle environment, or just this kind of like developed market fiscal dominance, gradual currency devaluation environment, it's so far been one of the best ways to protect yourself.
Yeah, and I was talking to my wife about this a couple of days ago. And this is a very layman's term view of it, because on top of that, and I don't know how much, there's obviously a lot of principles and things behind what I'm about to say, but there's also the notion of, I'm not saying that on some sort of Bitcoin standard, those that have Bitcoin and use Bitcoin, there wouldn't also be like loan and money lending and all of these different things, right? People have many different views of this. Bitcoin banks have been talked about for quite some time, and I think a lot of that would exist. But the notion, and I'm curious if you actually know some data or could point people in the direction of certain data, the notion of even credit spending and the amount of loans and things like that. So not only is, just say in the US alone, affordability is really tough. I live in the Boston area, one of the most, uh, the hardest to afford just daily life in the country, especially just home prices and things like this. A lot of people that I know personally are using a lot of credit card debt, a lot of just spending above their means. So it's really hard. I mean, obviously the different Affirm and Afterpay and whatever these pay later programs have just skyrocketed since COVID and beyond. I've seen some of the statistics. Some people will say, okay, it's not too out of the ordinary. Others will say this is the worst crisis ever, and those are kind of the two extremes of it. But there are quite a few people that their paychecks are not cutting it to afford life, but they're racking up credit card debt. They're doing what they need to do to get by. So it's almost this mirage as well. Even when people say the economy's good, actually, people are spending and going on trips. They are, and it's like, yeah, they are, but on credit cards, or they are, but it's through like pay later stuff, because we also have this view of just constant optimism or hope, I think, for our lives, where I'll pay for that later, or I'll get that promotion later, or I'll. So that to me, without this crazy economics background, but just listening to folks like yourself and, caring about Bitcoin and all this stuff, it doesn't seem like a good recipe as well at the individual consumer level on top of government spending level, where people are going well beyond their means. Some will say, well, they don't need to, but I'm talking about to buy groceries, to afford rent, to do these things. That also is kind of in parallel to what you're saying, seems like a really bad recipe.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of it's the artifact of the debasement we talked about. That if you expand the money
Yes.
supply by 40%, you can go to people and say, "Did you get a 40% raise?" Because if not, your share of the income is lower. Someone got that money, but it wasn't you, right? Another way I
Hmm.
phrase it is if you run the numbers, and I don't have them offhand, but it's if you look at the total deficit spending over the call it the past, kind of starting in COVID, right? It was something like $60,000 per household, right? If you just say,
Yeah.
okay, here's the amount of deficit spending that happened. Here's on a divided by number of households. Then you're going to say, well, did you get $60,000 in stimulus? Because I sure didn't, right?
Hmm.
But the person who owns a small business that got a $500,000 PPP loan that turns into a grant, they took that money and they went out and bought a second house,
Yeah.
or they went
Can I
on
tell you
and
a funny story of one?
sure,
There was one guy
yeah,
local to me. He ended up going to prison. So it was in the news.
yeah,
He owned a pizza shop and he got a giant PP, like $1 million or like
yeah.
1.5 million. I'm not quite sure how. Um, moved to Vermont and got like an alpaca farm. If I can find, I want to share this out, but and just moved there, and sold the business, and then they like arrested him in Vermont. But he went and just bought a house and an alpaca farm and a bunch of alpaca with a PPP loan. And it was
Yeah,
just a crazy local story. But, some people went to jail, but many people
yeah,
did not. Many people kept their businesses running.
yeah.
But like you said, we're never going to, but a lot of tomfoolery with all of
Yeah,
it for sure.
there's kind of like there's people that needed it. Like you're running a restaurant that literally would have failed, but you got this thing. That's a
Yeah.
minority. Then
Yeah.
there's a minority of like outright frauds. They got the money and they bought Lambos, or they like
Hmm.
lied about how many employees they even have, like, or they just kind of lied. Like there's outright fraud that people have been gone to jail for. Probably a lot more out there that haven't, but there's a minority of fraud. Then there's this big gray zone of companies that they were accurate in how many employees they have. They're like, yeah, we're probably gonna have layoffs if we don't get the money, and but they work in software, they work in law, they work in investments, they work in whatever the case may be, and they just get the money and they keep operating the business, and eventually those profits mostly go to the owners. Um, and how do you prosecute that? They kind of follow the letter of the law in that
Hmm.
regard. They didn't, and so basically the going back to the point, there's been this big increase in the money supply, and most regular people did not get their share of it, you could say. And so that's when they turn to these other things. My friend Jeff Booth likes to describe it that when money is weak, we monetize everything else, or everything else becomes scarce, which is to say, if money is weak, you can't save in the money. So you're going to save in other things. You're going to go buy a second property, right? Sometimes I visit Florida sometimes for family, and there's like mansions sitting on the coast that are just empty for 11 months out of the year, right? They're just store of value. They're a trophy store of value. Because if you're wealthy, you can't just hold cash. You can hold stocks and stuff. But you think, what can I own that's very scarce? And one of the things is waterfront property, right? And so when money's weak, people monetize other things, including just monetizing single family homes, just buying up rental properties and kind of just driving up the price of them, which then makes those homes more unaffordable to people that just want one house. They just want a house for themselves for the utility value. So houses have both a utility value, which is normal, and then they have this monetary premium on top of them because there are people just using them as savings accounts or as investments because they can't just invest. In Egypt, it's even more extreme. There's like just you'll go to like a neighborhood and it's just like endless, like as far as the eye can see, endless unfinished condos
Hmm.
because everybody what they do is the money supply is growing at 20% a year. You buy property, you construct property, and there's just endless property building, and it's like to some extent it's a malinvestment because it gets overbuilt and kind of creates like these ghost cities quicker than they probably should because people don't know what else to do with the money. And so the kind of monetary inflation causes a lot of these distortions. Um, and sounder money gives people more stability. And it's I don't think it's anything we're going to see anytime soon in the United States or elsewhere to kind of get back to like sound money. But in this environment, people have to kind of make do with what they can, and it's rough.
Oh gosh. Okay, Len. Yeah, I know you're right. I feel like too, just in terms of political rhetoric and this hyper partisan, very politically active campaign season, um, Trump is his own thing. I'll focus on the Democrats. I think for better or for worse, the Trump campaign is experiencing just a little bit of flailing right now, trying to figure out what to do with the other side and their own strategy and economics. But like you said, a lot of populist thoughts. There's a lot of other stuff that we don't have time to get into, just in terms of tariff conversations and things like that. That Trump says, sometimes the Democrats say, sometimes he says, but that's a bit inflationary as well. For that one's not hard to understand why it's inflationary. But I get the sense that even with the Democrats, there's a lot of talking points that they think that we are able to go back to some sort of 80s or 90s or 50s or 60s heyday in terms of economic sustainability and stability for families, where one person can earn enough for the household. The house is going to cost, you know, um, twice as much as your salary, not 5 to 7 times as much. These things. In my mind, I do wish, I know it's a lot to ask politicians, to be honest. I think some of it is truly just, whether it's campaign talking points, I think some of it is genuinely sometimes just education, sometimes things that they're putting forth that are not going to work out. But I don't know if they genuinely, sometimes they might think it's going to work out. But I almost view it as, and I'm just curious your take. One of the last points here is what your thoughts on it. Is there any sense of us being able to go back to a period of relative affordability? Or the way I view it, a lot of folks in millennial, definitely Gen Z, what we and what I did, even when I started looking into stocks, I was very against Wall Street and doing any of this. But I had enough wherewithal and started doing research to say this is one of the only ways is to play this game. I knew what assets were doing and I knew what wages were doing. Some of the basics, even before Bitcoin, saying I don't want to do this, but I feel like I have to. I feel like I have to have any chance at this normal life or some level of abundance to go on vacations is stuff that my parents and grandparents had. So a lot of us in the younger generation, regardless of our own personal political values, are having to play this game that we don't want to play. And some of us have also found that in Bitcoin, but it's a sure, you can view it as a game, I guess, to have this asset or hold this property, this money that you think will go up, but it feels a hell of a lot better than trying to bet or gamble on a company that you don't believe in or know anything about. These type of things. Do you think there's any relative normalcy that, and the reason I say this is because the large majority of the American population does not understand Bitcoin right now, right? Some may hold to varying degrees, but they don't get a lot of the things that you're talking about yet. It's not baked in. No one's communicating that you're trying, and many others are trying, but it's not effectively communicated about. This is the direction we're going, and there's no there's no stopping this train. Like clearly, it's just going to keep going this way. Do you think there's any ability for the U.S. government, for the economy to get back to this place of more affordability, or do you think it's kind of like, you know, stack Bitcoin and um, buckle up because we're kind of continuing in this direction?
So I think there's pessimistic and optimistic side. I think the pessimistic side is that transitions take a long time, and that I don't see this kind of difficult period ending like in the next few years. I think this is going to be a when you go through sovereign debt issues and you go through very polarized political environments, there's no easy button, right? This is a long process, and sometimes you have to kind of hit rock bottom before you build yourself back up, or at least the environment does. And so I think that's kind of my negative take there. That's kind of or the realistic side, I would say. The optimistic side is, and Natalie Smolenski has talked about this a lot. There's kind of America like the empire, and there's America the republic. And
Mhm.
there are options where America can focus more on, less on our foreign power projection and more on our domestic vibrancy. And there's all sorts of long conversations that can be had around the role of the dollar in terms of giving us structural trade deficits and these kind of global imbalances. That's it's probably too long to go in here at this point, but there are kind of these like foundational changes that can happen. Um, and it is true that a lot of people don't understand Bitcoin, but also a lot of people don't actually understand the dollar. Like they
Mhm.
use the dollar, But if you say, okay, well, what is a repo facility or a reverse repo facility? Well, those are core aspects of how the dollar system works. Or what is the relation of base money to broad money, right? There's these underlying aspects of the dollar that most people would not be able to articulate. Or what is the average money supply growth over the past 5 years? How does money come into being? How does that money supply growth happen? These are things that most people would not be able to articulate, and yet they use dollars every day. Um, and so I think kind of the idea of weak money or sound money is certainly something that people can get educated on. When it's almost like the middle of the road is the hardest part because it's kind of like boiling the frog. That idea
Hmm.
of like you don't really notice it. If you go to Argentina, they're very financially savvy because they kind of have to be, right? I mean, you learn pretty quickly if you save in the currency, you're going to get wrecked, and you have to put it in something else. Um, Whereas if you're in a more um, benign environment like Japan or Europe or the United States, you're getting very slowly rug pulled. All the contracts that you denominate things in, your wages, they're slowly getting devalued. And if you're not able to keep up, which is very hard to do because of the rate of money supply growth and trying to articulate that to your employer, that's a
And
challenge.
they won't understand, by the way, the
No.
employers, right? I think some people are like, especially on the left, are like, oh, greedy employers,
Yeah.
greedy corporations. I can point them to some of your tweets that have been good
Mhm.
recently. A lot of the employers don't understand. They think, oh yeah, we've been pretty good with raise increases.
Yeah.
You got 4% last year. You got inflation slowing.
Yeah.
Yeah, inflation's up like 45, 50%, depends on where you live as
Yeah.
well. Since 2020, like 4% my
Yeah.
ass. What are you talking about?
Exactly. And the businesses, I mean, their expenses are going up too. And it's like basically there's more money supply in the system. A lot of it wound up in a kind of a small number of hands, and basically people got diluted, and they're going to probably keep getting diluted. And the more quickly you learn about how that system works, I would literally just plug my book Broken Money. There are books out there. There's ways to educate. It's just realistically, it's going to take a while for more people. But the more they understand how the money system works, the more they can learn, at least around the margins, to protect themselves, and to understand where to direct changes they want to make, right? To understand the root of the problem. A lot of politicians will go after surface fixes, right? Um, Rather than the root of a given problem. And the more you understand the system, the more you can go after the root of the problem. I think during transitional phases, that's where being knowledgeable on something is really useful. Whereas in an ideal case, when things are going well, you shouldn't have to be an expert on money or investing. Kind of like if my car is working, I don't have to be an expert on how my car works, right? If I'm trying to invent the car, I got to be an expert on it. If I'm trying to be a car mechanic, I got to be an expert. And it's nice to know a thing or two, like the basics around a car, but I don't need to like understand all the details of how a car works. And in a good money environment, money just works. Money is sound. But because money's broken to either moderate to or severe degrees, depending on where you are, there's like more of an edge that you get from understanding how that money system works. And so I think that'd be my advice to people, like you said, the working class, the middle class, kind of on the extremes, it's easier to explain it to people. But if they're somewhere where they're trying to work, they're an expert on their field, but they don't not an expert on money or an expert on whatever else. It's like I'm not an expert on a bunch of other things. This is an environment where it does pay to put more time than average into understanding money and the sources of money creation, the competing types of money, how monetary philosophy, monetary history. Reading a handful of books over a couple months, I think is really helpful in at least kind of contextualizing the transition as we go through it. And I do think that on the other side of this, especially if there's enough people that are educated on the subject and that can articulate things better and understand what's happening, there is an optimistic future ahead. It's just going to go through a period of turmoil first.
Yeah, and I would like as many people to understand it as possible. I mean, if I can, anyone can, because I have a sociology humanities background. I was like putting two and two together. I'm not trusting corporations. I'm not crazy about state of the government and things like that. Let me see what these Bitcoiners are talking about. So people ask, "Oh, can the left or progressives understand whatever a concept they have of that?" I'm like, "Yes, because I did." In the US. So I think that that speaks waves. And I think too, like just reading your book, I think we mentioned resistance money. There's so many more things to understand these days. There's so many more texts to read, which is really great and relatable. And when I was saying understand money or understanding Bitcoin, one of the things I think a good litmus test is like what happened recently with the yen, Japan, like when Bitcoin kind of over what an 8-day period went down like 20%. If you didn't, how do I say this? If you didn't feel anything, if you didn't like question or think anything, I think there are certain drawbacks of Bitcoin where you're just like, yeah, you understand it. I think there's still a lot of people that keep coming in that are very trigger happy, that view it as another asset, view it as another crypto. But if you, I posted on Nostr and some people got a little, maybe not frustrated, but I said Bitcoin, even for people that don't like Bitcoin, you don't even have to like Bitcoin, but view Bitcoin as like an insurance policy because it seems like this system's not heading in a great direction in terms of savings, in terms of, so even if you just view Bitcoin as an insurance policy or just as a like, this will do something different than this. I think that's a good way for people to also enter. I've talked to some people about it in that way, and they're starting to enter it that way. They're not full blown maxis. They're not understanding these other things, but they're viewing it as like, I'm not sure about this over here. Bitcoin is different, so I'm gonna view it that way.
Yeah, I think that's it's early adopters, and I still think that this is an early adoption phase just because,
Mm-hmm.
there's like statistics that show hundreds of million people globally own it, but that includes people that own like $10 of like dog.
$5 on
Yeah,
Coinbase.
and
Yeah,
like it might not even be Bitcoin. It could be like dog themed tokens, right?
sure. Yep.
So the people, like a number of people that have meaningfully like owned a non-trivial amount of it for their relative net worth, or that have taken self-custody at one point, or have sent it to someone else. That's still a very low number. Or the people that can tell you, what is the halving? How does the halving work? More, back, elevator pitch on how does the halving work, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
what are the pros and cons of proof of work versus proof of stake? Or whatever kind of, why are the block times 10 minutes roughly? Why aren't they 2 seconds? Why, like, so, or why does Bitcoin not do 10 times more transactions on the base layer than it currently does? Why not increase that number, right? So the number of people that can answer the majority of those questions is a tiny percentage of the population. So when there's an early adopter phase, that's where information's a really big edge, right? If you were investing 10, 15 years ago, and identifying the likelihood of social media taking storm, or identifying the mobile internet being a gigantic deal and everything kind of going online, that would have given you a tremendous opportunity in either structuring your business, knowing what field to go work in, or how to invest, right? And I think that we're kind of in that environment now where there are, there's Bitcoin's over $1 trillion, but that's still small compared to kind of the total addressable market of good money globally, right? And um, so I think it pays for people to kind of look into and differentiate it. But realistically, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time for people to kind of understand, why is it volatile? Why is the current state different than the state that it could be one day? It's already different than it was 10 years ago. What is it going to look like 10 years from now? Most likely. Um, and I think that knowing the fact that it's been the biggest cryptocurrency for 15 years in a row since it was started. And there's like statistics, like I remember Sam Callahan of Swan at the time. He did this like statistical analysis, and like out of 20,000 cryptos at the time, something like three of them have ever had a higher high against Bitcoin in the next cycle. Every crypto kind of, or like all the big cryptos kind of go through their day in the sun, where like VCs are pumping them and the founders pumping them, and then they're usually selling on retail at the top. And these tokens have these big bull runs, and then they never really recover, especially in Bitcoin denominated terms. And there's only been like three that have managed to do it like once, right? They get two cycles in. They have a little bit more oomph to them, and those statistics are just terrible, right? So when one currency's been the biggest for 15 years in a row, when nothing's really kind of gotten ahead for more than a cycle at a time, at the outlier 2 cycles before rolling over, and when you see the network effects and when you see the stability, when you see that it's changed its rules, like little to minimal compared to other cryptocurrencies that change their rules on a regular basis. There's just really two separate categories. There's Bitcoin, and then there's kind of everything else. Or even there's three categories. There's Bitcoin, there's stable coins or crypto dollars, and then there's everything else. And I think that's kind of the way to categorize the space.
Yeah, I would agree, and that's a message we want to keep putting out, especially as Democrats might become more favorable, let's say less hostile to Bitcoin. I'm feeling a bit more that there's going to be some less hostility. I think Elizabeth Warren is being kind of pushed to the side, especially by Chuck Schumer and others. They're like, all right, we gotta we gotta move on here. But the biggest phase we're in is let's not get too carried away with, well, this other crypto is going to, and I try to talk about it in terms of that as well. Like if you're looking for sound money, smart money, a good way to save, a thing that's really globally interconnected in all those stories. There really is nothing else like Bitcoin, and just look at it on the merits. And then most other crypto projects are VC speculative tools. I think that is a fair factual statement, and few others maybe have specific use cases that maybe I just disagree with. Other people might be better well versed in that. Maybe they're not necessarily scams, but they're very different than the functionality of Bitcoin. And I think that's something we got to keep putting out there. Lyn, thank you so much as always for supporting the show, for connecting with me. I will say too, there's few people in this space such as yourself that you're an early adopter on many things. One, Bitcoin. I think you're incredibly smart on a lot of things in a very, I hate saying the word partisan, but it's just the world we live in with US politics and all of this stuff. Like you're someone who I can refer my friends to to learn about things in the space. Someone who I think is really has ability to take a step back. And I think that's gone very well, obviously, for you in the past few years, just in terms of your audience and things like that. But also, you're an early adopter on Nostr, and there's very few of us on Nostr. So taking that jump, I think, will not literally pay off, maybe, but in years to come, there's not many people that are willing to utilize that as well. So I think that sends such high signal. At least for me, a bunch of us were excited when Lyn's on Nostr. She's getting more involved in Nostr. But I don't want to hold you too much longer. But just if you want to, we've done many episodes on Nostr, and we'll continue to with Rabble, Ben Arc, so many others on the show. But what is it for you coming from the world of macro land, coming from a lot of success and visibility on X and on traditional social media? I think X is probably your only other spot, right? Like that, and that in your newsletter. What for you was interesting about Nostr that made you come to Nostr and be posting there?
So a couple things. One is decentralized social media, and not like in the fake way, but actually a pretty substantial way.
So you're not on
Um,
Truth Social or
yeah, not
any of the
just
others?
yeah. People get so far. There's been all these band-aid fixes. Someone's like, I don't like the perceived bias of this platform, so I'm going to make a different platform with a different bias. But it's still
Hmm.
a
Yep.
centralized social media with a bias, right? Or like a collection of people, which is fine. It's basically a big forum. There used to be. I remember I go back long enough in the internet that there were just multiple small forums that people would post on, and they could be a thematic forum. It could be, and that's kind of what these other social networks are. They're kind of their own big forum that has people running it. Um, and what Nostr is actually decentralized social media. There's no, it's a protocol, like an open source protocol. It's not a company. There are companies that can build on top of it and improve it in some ways, but the actual ecosystem itself is open source and distributed. And in addition, people can own their own identity. So, for example, if they want to use one client to access Nostr and they decide I don't like this algorithm or I don't like this interface, and there's this other program over there that is accessing Nostr as well, and I'd like their algorithm or I like their interface better. You can take your private key and go over and use that other client instead, and bring your followers with you. Who you're following comes with you. Your content is still it's a shared identity across multiple different applications, kind of like how all of our emails, like if I use Gmail and you use Yahoo, we can send emails to each other and we can switch. But this is even more extensive than that, because if you switch from, say, Gmail to another email provider, you might not be able to bring your email address with you. You might not be able to bring your follower, your existing content with you. Whereas Nostr, you actually can. And so it's kind of the most credible way I've seen so far to do decentralized social media. And I do think, one of the things I worry about is social media algorithms and what it does for us. Like what it does to us as a society. People act very differently online when they don't have the tempering social cues of the real world. And
Mhm.
algorithms can be used to rile people up or amplify, divisive information or just kind of like change the course of society. And so I think having multiple different algorithms to access the same information is just less centralizing and less scary for society. So Nostr is something that I think is both technically viable and something that if it were to be more widespread or at least that type of thought were to spread, it'd be useful. And one of the points I've made in kind of a recent conversation on Nostr was even if Nostr stays small or moderate in size, it's in addition to being software, it's an idea. Kind of like how Bitcoin is both software, it's actually a functioning network, but then it's also an idea. It's 21 million coins. You can send it to other people, no one can stop you. You can self custody yourself. Bitcoin has kind of a verbal rule set, like a language that extends even beyond its code. And Nostr is kind of like that. It's saying, well, what if you could choose your own algorithm? What if you can access the same network with different clients? And I think that as long as that idea is known now, and the more we can spread that idea, even other ecosystems could be pressured to kind of opt in to using that type of model because it makes the existing model less and less defensible when there's a known alternative that can exist.
Yeah, and I think it changes patterns online as well. I mentioned to you I spoke with Mike Brock recently. We talked a lot about this. Yeah, it's something I struggled with on X and decided to deactivate my personal X account. We still have our podcast available to anyone for the content to be widely. It was like me and my time outside of building stuff I care about spent online will be through Nostr, and it's less addictive because of the algorithm. I'd spend less time on there. Also, the community's smaller. Yes, all of this stuff, but X was such a time suck for me. It was such a why am I battling with these people? Why am I taking personal attacks like this? That Nostr is still a relatively small community. It's a very Bitcoin community. Some might say more right leaning community, but I on there don't experience the same level of attacks saying the same things because when I show up to a place, I want to be authentically myself as well. Just because why show up then? But I'm not receiving the same level of text, and it just taught me ways of I want to interface with our digital realm, which everyone is involved with. So yeah, it's kind of like even more so the idea of decentralized social media, all this stuff. It's also the way we interact online, the way we interact in the time suck of not being human. Like I don't know if our brains can handle that level yet. Like technology evolved a lot faster than we did to handle that, and I'm very worried for people on that front. I'm not saying spend 8 hours a day on Nostr and that will change it, but typically I think people are spending less time on Nostr than they would have been on X. People can post on Nostr, maybe you post once a month. And it's because it's a message that you don't want rugged. It's someone recording the events in Venezuela of the election, and they don't want to be rugged on X, or in
Exactly.
India, they don't want to be rugged on X. That's incredibly, incredibly powerful. Yeah, but it's been very positive for me just on that level.
Yeah, same for me as well. And I've also pointed out that it's really good for Bitcoin wallets as well. It makes Bitcoin wallets so much better. Instead of trying to ask
Yeah.
someone what their payment information is, if they're on Nostr, you can just look them up. Sometimes right within your wallet, or just plug it into your wallet, and you can send someone money in a similar way that you could look them up on Venmo and pay them. Except it's the open source international version. Um, and so even as a fairly small Bitcoiner network, and there are actually people on some of my favorite people on Nostr don't like Bitcoin because then
Yeah, they
it's
hate
like,
Bitcoin.
yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
love it.
yeah.
I love it because that means Nostr it's getting its own identity and its
Mhm.
own the use cases are
They've
showing
come from like
themselves.
Mastodon and other
Yeah,
places, maybe Reddit, they heard about it. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, and that's great. And for the Bitcoiners that are there, even to the extent that it stays fairly small and Bitcoinery, it makes Bitcoin wallets better because it may like I could look you up and pay. Like if we share an Uber, I could and you like paid for it, I could then just look you up on Nostr and just re- pay you back rather than saying, hey, can you send me like a Lightning invoice or hey, what's your Zelle or like what, I can just look you up and pay you. That unilateral payment discovery is really powerful. And I think that Nosh is going to show us more use cases than just social media. But I think owning your own identity, being able to interoperate move around to different applications, different algorithms, different user interfaces, and then also have payments built into your social media experience in a way that's open source and just kind of under the control of no individual entity. That's just a super powerful concept, both in practice. So the code matters, the implementation matters, but then also the idea that now that it's possible, why shouldn't we have that capability everywhere?
Well, you heard it here, people. Jump on Nostr. Give Lyn a follow on Nostr. You hear about it a lot on this show. Lyn, where can people find you? Subscribe to the newsletter. What are any things that you want to get out to our audience?
People can check out lynalden.com. They can find me on Twitter or Nostr, or they can check out Broken Money on Amazon or elsewhere.
Sweet. Lyn, thank you so much for this great conversation, and I'll see you on Nostr and other places.
Thanks for having me.